we shouldn't assume that what's happened is all that's going to happen. I don't know if it's the first inning of a 9-inning game or the 5th inning, but it's not the end of it.
Why now?
It's a good question. Bibi Netanyahu hinted or intimated that there was something new. We haven't seen it in the way of intelligence. Either the Israelis had some new intelligence about where Iran was, or maybe put together an assessment that said something. This is what I would call a preventive war. This was a war that was launched, or an attack launched by Israel, not against an imminent threat, but against a gathering threat. And what Israel, I believe, owes to its own population, to the region, to the United States and the world, is an explanation. What was it that motivated Israel to act just now? Because we don't have an answer.
There was a time not too long ago when nothing happened in that part of the world without the U.S. having some major role. Do we have a role in this? Is Israel paying attention to us? Are we encouraging them? Are we discouraging them? Where are we?
Well, we clearly didn't put up a red light. We may not even put up a yellow light. There was some back and forth between the Israelis and the Americans. These negotiations were going on. 5 rounds had taken place. The 6th round was scheduled for a few days from now. If an American president goes to an Israeli prime minister and basically says, do not do this, or it will have tremendous adverse consequences for your relationship with me, for your country's relationship with my country, in virtually any scenario short of an existential threat to the Jewish state, the Israelis would hold back. Clearly, Donald Trump did not do that to Bibi Netanyahu. But there may have been a little bit more coordination diplomatically between the United States and Israel than we understand.
What restraints or constraints do we think might exist on Israel and on Iran, quite apart from the U.S. influence? For example, we have not seen Israel go after oil fields in Iran. We haven't seen Iran go after the Strait of Hormuz. It appears right now, for the moment, they may be a little restrained.
I would argue that most of the restraints are on the Iranian side, simply because Iran is so vulnerable. Go back to last year. In April and October of last year, Israel weakened Iranian air defenses. This is the 3rd time they've done it. Essentially, Israel's demonstrated its ability to operate over Iran with near impunity. Iran is vulnerable to Israel or the United States, conceivably even to some of its neighbors. One of the things I'm going to watch closely, because I think it's related to the Israeli attack, this was not just an Israeli attack against nuclear installations. It wasn't just an Israeli attack against bases, military bases. Clearly, this was an attack aimed at disrupting, weakening, conceivably pushing out the Iranian leadership. I think that's a tall order. But I would think that one of the things all observers want to watch is what the Iranians do. And their priority, I would think, will not be tactically to respond against Israel unless they believe that's necessary to hold on to power.
What do you expect the Israeli goal is here? What is their mission? We knew when they went into Gaza, they said they wanted to defeat, if not destroy, Hamas entirely. We've talked in the past about really destroying the nuclear facilities in Iran. That's a tall order. Is that their goal? Is that achievable?
Probably several goals. One is to, again, show Iran as being so weak that directly and indirectly through its proxies, it's got to be extraordinarily careful. And the Israelis have simply reinforced that message, which they've done several times. Secondly, yes, to weaken the nuclear establishment. There's the one big site, as best I know, David, they haven't gone after yet, which is Fordo, which is one of the major enrichment sites. It's also the one that's hardest to destroy. It's most underground. So the Israelis, what word do you want to use? Reduced, degraded the Iranian nuclear establishment, killed some of its leading officials, but there's still an Iranian nuclear establishment with various installations, known and unknown.
Iran has said that if there are attacks against it, it will sprint to actually develop nuclear weapons. Is that a realistic threat? And what does this do to that? Is there a danger here that they will actually do that and get nuclear weapons faster than they would have gotten?
Not faster, but in a way that's more difficult to do this again. I would think the Iranians can't sprint easily to nuclear weapons. They've got to reestablish their leadership, but they would have to do it in ways that future Israeli strikes couldn't get out. Deep, deep, deep underground. So my guess is that won't be, if you will, a near-term response, but could that be a medium and long-term response? Absolutely. I could also imagine the Iranians saying we're not going to cooperate with international authorities like we have. Where was the world coming to our defense? We were still talking to the IAEA. Israel acted against us. There will be people, I bet, in Tehran saying, if we had had nuclear weapons, this never would have happened. It's the fact that we don't have nuclear weapons that the Israelis can act this way against us. So I would think that's going to become an intense debate in Iran.
This is, of course, first and foremost a geopolitical issue. There are armaments being deployed. There may well be lives lost. We've already seen some of the leadership of Iran. It also has potential economic ramifications in the United States and around the world. I wonder if you could talk about specifically one question, which is inflation.
We'll get new numbers soon. It won't affect those. Over time, yes, if oil prices were to stay considerably higher. But let's take a step back. Oil prices have gone up however many dollars, and we'll see where they settle out by next week. Still, by historical terms, oil prices are relatively modest. Once you factor in inflation, if you remember where we've been at various times, so just say we're in the low 70s. That's not that high. Out of all the things that are going to cause inflation, this should, I think, simply be one of them. But it could now, if oil prices went up to 90, 100, 110, and stayed there, big thing, and stayed there. But that would require probably there to be an open-ended series of exchanges, not just between Israel and Iran, but Iran would have to decide that war widening made sense for it as strategy. And by that I mean going after Saudi Aramco, having the Houthis do more things to interrupt and so forth. Possible, won't rule it out. And if that were to happen, it could have an inflationary impact. But quite honestly, David, stuff that we're likely to do to ourselves in terms of our own policy is going to have much more inflationary impact than I think this crisis will.
Exactly my question. We've had some economic policy uncertainty in the United States since Donald Trump resumed office.
Yes.
And there are a lot of ramifications potentially for the economy in that. How, if at all, does this conflict in the Middle East play against the tariff threat?
If you ask me, the bigger issues are still made in America. I think the bigger sources of uncertainty, tariff policy is enormous. Questions about domestic, political, whatever you want to call it, instability, rule of law, and so forth in this country. Renewed inflation from various sources and so forth. I would think those raise bigger questions right now. If you're worried about China and the U.S., it might be export controls. And what is the nature of those mutual regimes like? But I think this adds to it. Anytime bad things happen, unexpected things happen, this is relatively unexpected until the last few days, it just adds to people's uncertainty and it adds to their sense, maybe we ought to keep our wallets in our pocket.
A lot of uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty, is leading to more defense spending in the United States, as proposed by Republicans on the Hill, sure, and in Europe, is what we're seeing right now. Will this be material with respect to that, or was that horse already out of the barn?
I think that horse is already out of the barn. In Europe, what's motivating it is uncertainty over the wisdom of continued reliance on the United States and the fact that the Europeans begin from such a relatively low base. Speaking about which, so do we. If you look at the percentage of GDP that the United States spends on defense compared to the Cold War, we're not even half the average levels we were at during the Cold War. And we now face uncertainty in 3 geographies, at least: Asia Pacific, Europe, and the Middle East. This is a time that's extraordinarily stressful for American defense strategy, for American force structure, which, by the way, seems very outdated. We've got a small number of very expensive platforms, which could be overwhelmed, I would think, by these very inexpensive systems like drones or anti-ship weapons, anti-air missiles, and the like. So yeah, American defense spending is seriously below what it needs to be. Though if I were going to filibuster and make one more point, David, what's always more important than how much you spend is how you spend it. And the problem with the American defense spending is not simply the level, but it's the content of it. We have to borrow from Eisenhower, we have a military-industrial legislative complex. We've now got 3 forces that are making it hard to come up with a rational, optimal defense posture. That's our biggest problem.
Final point, and it's not filibustering at all, because you wrote a book, most recently Bill of Obligations, but before that, you wrote a book about the connection between the economic strength of the United States and national security.
Well, foreign policy begins at home.
Exactly right. As we are looking at the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, what do you make of our economic posture and what it means for our national security?
Well, there's questions of the bill, also questions of the debt ceiling, the tariffs. What they've all added up to, David, is they've raised questions about America's stewardship. The rest of the world, like it or not, depends on the United States. We're still a quarter of the world's economy. The dollar has a pivotal role. I think the fact that this is one of the first times we've seen the United States in a crisis, whether we generate it or not, no longer be the safe haven, but we're beginning to see other places emerge as alternatives to the United States. That tells you all you need to know. other leaders, other central bankers around the world can no longer operate with a confident set of assumptions and predictions about the United States. And that in and of itself drives them, quite honestly, to hedge their bets on the United States.